Hey, welcome back. Now that we've gotten our weapon situated, we've got it cleaned, we've learned our basic operation, it's a good time right now to talk about fundamentals. I don't like to overcomplicate the fundamentals process of this instruction here. You have your 4 fundamentals, 8 fundamentals, however fundamentals you want. I break it down into 2 firing tasks. Okay, first task is properly point the weapon at the target. The second task is fire the weapon without moving it. Really, if you can accomplish those 2 tasks, you can fire accurately. That's really all there is to it. It's just that simple. Now, of course, there's supporting aspects to this that we can do to disrupt those tasks or to cause error there, and we're going to get into those now. I just want to make it clear, this is how I break it down. 2 firing tasks. Properly point the weapon at the target and fire it without moving it. Now let's go ahead and talk about the first task. Point the weapon. Now, the weapon is always pointed somewhere. This is true even if we're not looking through the sights. So if we were to fire this weapon right now, where would it go? Well, excluding external ballistics, bullet drop and wind drift and the spin of the earth, the bullet's generally going to go where the barrel's pointed. Now, in order to know where this weapon's pointed and effectively place a shot where we want to go, we need a method to reference where it's pointed at. And that's the purpose of the sights. So we've got 2 different sight systems that we're going to talk about. Mechanical and red dot. Now, red dot and mechanical sights accomplish the same purpose, but they go about it by different ways. Let's talk about mechanical first. What we need to understand with mechanical sights is they work off the principle of sight alignment. Now, what does sight alignment really mean? When we're looking through them, are we really aligning the sights? Are the sights on this rifle right now currently aligned? Well, you might say, well, we're not looking through them, so we don't know. But the position of the front sight and the rear sight really don't physically change on this rifle if we're looking through it or we're not looking through it. What we're actually having to change is the position and the alignment of our head. More specifically, our eye that we're using to reference our sights with. Okay? So when we're looking through these sights, we could steer the rifle back and forth to get the sights to appear left or right from each other, but that's actually pointing the weapon in a different direction, right? And that's not what we want to do. We want to reference the sights to see where the sights are pointed. So in order to do that, we have to have a proper sight picture or sight alignment. So to achieve that, what we're actually doing is aligning our eye behind the rear sight aperture and referencing the front sight aperture. We change the position of our eye to make our front sight appear properly with our rear sight aperture. Meaning we want to have it appear in the center. Now, our red dot sights, like this EOTech here, they actually kind of work on a different principle. It has a series of collimating mirrors inside that correct the perceived position of that holographic red dot and compensate for the angle that we're looking through. This is to some degree. It's advertised at being parallax free beyond 40 yards. Okay, so closer than 40 yards, we still need to try to align our head and eye properly to make sure that holographic sight is in the center of the viewing pane. But past that, we get a lot of leeway with how we look through it. So it's just a fairly important concept to understand. We're using the sights to reference where the rifle's pointed. Mechanical sights force our head and eye to align properly behind the rifle to see where it's pointed. The red dot or reflex sight allows us more flexibility with our head position when we engage to reference where the barrel's pointed. Now, how should they appear properly? Basically, the front sight post should be in the center of the rear aperture, just like this picture. So we're kind of drawing an imaginary crosshair that bisects the circular rear aperture vertically and horizontally. And we want the center of the top blade of the front sight post to appear directly in the center. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Of course, this is a little bit easier if you're using a diamond rear aperture like I do. But that's basically it. Your human eye is capable of doing this really rapidly and very accurately. Just like this square here, we look at it, right away you can see it's not level, right? What about this circle and the dot in the center? Right away you can see it's not in the center. Okay, so we're capable of doing this really accurately and very quickly. All right, now let's talk about sight placement. Okay, this is what we do beyond our sight alignment. What sight placement is placing our sights at the proper or desired aim point on the target. Now we'll get into desired aim points later, but for right now, that's just what we're talking about, is placing our sights on the target. Now our sight alignment plus our sight placement is known as the integrated sight picture. Okay, that's just putting everything together into what we're seeing. Now, since we're talking about our integrated sight picture, which is our target, our front sight, and our rear sight, now's a good time to talk about where we're focusing our vision. Now, this only applies to mechanical sights. Okay, optical sights are going to work a bit differently. For mechanical sights, you'll hear different methods out there. You're going to focus on the threat, or you're going to focus on the front sight. What I teach at the basic level is actually doing vision shifts. So when we're looking through our sights, what I tell students to do is actually focus on their rear sight, and then their front sight, then their target, then their front sight, and then their rear sight. It's a continuous check process where we're confirming our sight alignment and our sight placement throughout our breathing cycle, throughout our trigger prep cycle, and breaking the shot when the sights are properly placed on the target with an aligned picture. We're just constantly going through and checking that. And what it's doing is it's teaching your mind and your eye to accept or recognize when your sights are aligned and placed properly, so you can naturally break the shot instinctively. Okay, so we're basically building muscle memory with our mind for what we should be seeing. And this is true in a tactical situation or a combat situation. If you've developed these fundamentals where you know how to reference your sights, you can reference it with the whatever level you need to at that time to be able to pull off that shot with the speed and accuracy that you need to. Meaning, if I'm at a close range with a target, maybe I'm just seeing my front sight on the target and I'll squeeze the trigger and let it go. If I've got a bit more distance, or I've got a low percentage shot, like a guy holding a gun to a person's head, and all I have is a head here. Okay, maybe I slow down, I do a quick re-reference of my sights to make sure everything's aligned properly, and then I break the shot. Okay, so that's just a concept to understand. When you're first learning your sight alignment, is just constantly do those vision shifts. Don't just focus on your front sight. Don't just focus on the target, because if you just focus on one of those things, something's going to get lost in that process, and you're not going to be able to effectively read your sights or know what happened so you can correct it. So we're progressively focusing at each plane to confirm that everything's good to go. Hope that makes sense. Now, later, we're going to talk about some more aspects that affect our first firing task. But now let's talk about some things that affect our second firing task, which is fire the weapon without moving it. Unfortunately, there's a couple things that we do that have the potential to move the weapon during the firing process. One of them is breathing, right? When we breathe, it generally causes our body to move vertically or up and down. We have to breathe. There's negative effects of not breathing, right? If we hold our breath and continue to hold it, we'll start to shake, our vision will begin to constrict and blur, and none of these things are going to help us see the target better or fire more accurately. So, how do we fire the weapon without moving it and breathe? Well, the answer is that we fire ideally during the natural respiratory pause. Now, there's some really good news about this, is that you're already trained to do this. Right now, you're trained to do this, right? The natural respiratory pause is nothing more than where you naturally pause during your respiratory process, right? You take a breath in and you let it out, and you pause. Everybody naturally pauses at this point of their breathing process. Nobody takes a breath in and holds it and pauses there. It's just how you breathe during the normal time of the day. Now, one note here is that when we naturally take a breath in and let it out, if we try to force exhale a little bit more at that natural respiratory pause, you'll notice that more air comes out. That's because we don't naturally pause with all of the air out of our lungs. We always have a little bit of air in our lungs. It's the relaxed state of our diaphragm. Okay? So we breathe in, we breathe out, and we pause. How long do we hold our breath? Well, only as long as is natural, because if we hold our breath longer than is natural, we start to get some of those adverse effects. So this is what our breathing cycle looks like right here. It's up and it's down, and we have these plateaus in the middle where we have pauses, right? So ideally we want to break our shot at one of these pauses. That's what we're looking for. Now, that doesn't mean we continue holding this pause if we haven't taken the shot. If we haven't taken the shot during this pause, we just repeat the cycle and try to break the shot in the next pause, right? When we're trying to learn the fundamentals, there's no time limit. We're not running pro timers. We just want to build muscle memory on how this is supposed to look. So, breathing again, we're trying to fire at our natural respiratory pause. Very important that you do this at a consistent point every single time. Now, the next supporting task of firing the weapon without moving it is trigger pull. Now, this can vary to some degree on how it affects this task based off of what type of trigger setup you have on your weapon. If you're running a bone stock M4 or AR-15, it's going to affect it a lot more. Now, how does it affect it more? It's because of the weight of the trigger pull, meaning the weight of the trigger pull actually exceeds the weight of the weapon. So you have to apply enough force to that trigger to actually cause it to move or support its weight. Now, if you're using a lighter trigger, like on my Match JP here, it's much less weight to be able to pull it. So I've got less chance of disrupting that where the weapon's pointed during the firing process. Now, let's talk about how we pull the trigger. How we pull the trigger is a slow, progressive increase of weight until it breaks. Meaning, we start pulling and we increase the pressure at a consistent rate until it breaks. We want to be smooth. The other thing we want to do is pull the trigger directly to the rear, right? We don't want to impart any lateral forces on it that's going to cause the barrel to point in a different direction. Now, the problem with that is how our fingers are hinged. Our fingers aren't exactly designed to come directly to the rear, right? Because we're hinged to move in an arc. So what we want to do to give us the best chance to pull the trigger directly to the rear is place it properly. Now, there's different methods with how people teach this. You may hear on the pad or in between the pads, the knuckle or the second pad, but that's kind of cookie cutter answers, and not all of our hands are the same size. Not all of our fingers are the same size. So really, it's what's best for you. Now, the best chance to get us to properly place our finger on the trigger is just to grab the weapon, just as we normally would, and allow our trigger finger to lay naturally on the weapon. That's going to give us the best chance. Now, of course, if our fingers are really long or really short, and this is going to cause difficulty with too much of our finger extending through, then we're just going to build out the grip a little bit more using some padding or some moleskin or whatever you want to use. But see, for me, my trigger actually rests right about here, just below that joint. And that's just giving me the best chance to pull the trigger directly to the rear. So natural trigger finger placement is what I teach. Now we need to talk about follow through. Follow through is basically what we do after we pull the trigger. It's the process of reading our sights and resetting the trigger. This is one of the most important concepts to understand and apply to be a good, accurate marksman. So let's talk about follow through here. So to follow through with my shot, what I'm going to do, and you need to get into the habit of doing this right now. Of course, I've already cleared the weapon because I'm going to dry fire it and I'm pointing it in a safe direction. But when I squeeze the trigger, I pull it to the rear and hold it there. You need to get in the habit of doing this now. I pull it and hold it there. Okay, the hammer's dropped inside. What I'm going to do is cycle the weapon. Now, of course, during the normal process, the round is actually going to cycle the bolt, and it's going to cause the weapon to move. Ideally, you should see just a little bit of sight lift. But during this process, when I'm holding the trigger to the rear, I'm continually looking through the sights and I'm monitoring what's happening with the sights. This is the rifle's method of communicating to you what the rifle's doing and what you're doing to the rifle. Okay, when the sights settle back down onto the target, I'm going to gradually release pressure until I hear the metallic click. Right there, that's the disconnector engaging. That's telling me that I can go ahead and re-engage the target. And then I re-squeeze when my sights are back on the target. Very important concept here. We're kind of putting two things together. You know, reading our sights while we're holding that trigger to the rear and properly resetting it. Resetting the trigger properly is very, very important because we don't want to get in the habit of letting our finger off the trigger. That's going to start to build in habits of slapping the trigger, which is going to cause it to move back and forth during the firing process, especially when we start picking up the pace or firing rapid shots. And we need to continually look through the sights. You know, there's a lot of times when we go down range to check targets with students. You know, I'll ask them, well, which shot was that you dropped low and left, or how did that shot feel? What did you see? And I'm checking to see if that person's actually looking through his sights and things are registering there, right? So when you're firing that shot, you're actually monitoring the sights, and you want to kind of remember what happens there, because there's different actions you need to take or not take to correct or reinforce what you see. Okay, so follow-throughs, very, very important concept.